Hello everybody, Peter here again, Peter Beresford from Shaping Our Lives. And this is just to say that this is the fourth in our series of brief videos, filmettes about user involvement. I hope they're becoming helpful for you. We have a very special focus today: how not to involve people in your group or organisation. How not to involve people. Now, we already in the first of these little videos talked about how initiatives from the state, service providers, authorities to involve people can make sure they involve as few people as badly as possible. And of course, a route that people choose to try and get really involved is to have their own organisations, their own service user, disabled people's, mental health service user, community organisations that can take a lead in making it possible for us to get together and get effectively involved. But that doesn't mean that we can prevent such involvement happening, that we can avoid having people getting involved effectively and inclusively, even in such organisations. I want to tell you today how, if you really want to make sure that your group or organisation, even though you say you're user-led, is really as uninclusive, excluding as possible, that there are ways to achieve this. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. How you can make sure that people do not get involved in your group or organisation. Now, there are lots of ways of doing this. Obviously, I won't cover all the ground in a couple of minutes, but I'm going to do my very best. First of all, this is the important thing, remember that small for you can be beautiful. Now let's say you start as a small group of friends or mates, people with things in common, shared interests. Maybe you want to keep it like that. After all, if you want to keep in control, there's no better way than keeping it small. That really does mean trying to make sure that in one way or another you can keep new people out. I know there'll be critics of this who say that you're making it impossible to be broad-based, that you're ignoring and rejecting diversity. We'll come back to that. However, I have to say from my own experience over a number of years, there's no better way of keeping control than staying small. Making sure that if you were a like-minded group of people with a lot of things in common backgrounds and the rest, common experience and a common set of goals, that you can keep it just like that and not have to be forced to move on. So my suggestion is that if people do try and get involved, if they hear about you, and I would try and keep a low profile from other people in the community and as service users if I were you, even though you'll want to have a high profile with the authorities, that if they do get in touch, then be as uninviting and as unwelcoming as you possibly can. There are all sorts of ways of doing this. For example, don't advertise your meetings in all sorts of places. Have your meetings at really difficult times. Have your meetings in inaccessible places. Perhaps have meetings, one group I was once part of, unfortunately, they did that. Have your meetings very late on, perhaps, or very early, but in people's homes, which you can guess may not be accessible. Make it that you really frighten off people. Let's say someone comes and gets through the door. Well, there's something really valuable you can use here. It's called procedural democracy. It means that what you do is you go absolutely by the book about democracy. That's to say, you expect people to know all the rules of doing things in a traditionally democratic way. You know the stuff. We have minutes, not notes. We do things like only through the chair. We do things like we say on a procedural point. We say out of order. We make it also, of course, that we don't really tell people who aren't used to this sort of language what it all means. We don't talk in ordinary, comfortable ways. But we work the way that we imagine that traditional political parties, or in the past perhaps traditional trades unions, work. So it's really quite intimidating for people who've never been in that sort of situation before. It does tend to work. People think, oh God, I don't want to go there again. And there you are. job done. Now, there's something linked with this. The organisation I'm part of, Shaping Our Lives, now we've established ground rules to work out how people can work with each other in the most helpful, friendly, without conflict kind of a way, in the most inclusive and accessible way. Do not have ground rules like that. Make it so that if there's someone who really likes to talk, perhaps you, that you can keep going on that one and make sure somebody else, especially less confident than you, never gets a word in. That's a brilliant idea. So don't have supportive ground rules. Keep doing things the way you've always done them. I think that's the best piece of advice. If there have been ways that you've done it, then rule out of order anyone who suggests doing it in a different kind of way that they might feel more comfortable with, that might feel more culturally comfortable for them, that sort of thing. After all, it's worked for you so far, and if they're coming in now wanting to get involved, really, why should they change the way that you work? That's not really fair. After all, what you began as probably, and now certainly will have become, is a nice tight group of friends, what we call a clique. And now cliques can be really effective. They've influenced history. Well, not necessarily for the better, but they've influenced history. So if you want to stay that kind of cosy clique, doing things the way you've always done them, feeling good about yourself, then make sure you don't deviate from the kinds of rules that we're talking about and be welcoming to people, as I've said. It's quite a useful thing to have a very narrow range of people that you're concerned with. So, like Shaping Our Lives is for the widest range of disabled people. People with learning difficulties, older people, people with long-term conditions, physical and sensory impairments. Maybe it would be a good idea if you just stuck with one very narrow group of people, perhaps on the basis of a diagnosis, maybe even an uncommon diagnosis. Now, going back to this point about doing things the way you've always done them, I really think if you're small, you can be effective. If you don't involve new people who might rock the boat, you will find that the authorities might quite like working with you because they'll know your measure and they'll know that you're not really very inclusive, so that if you were ever to say anything they didn't want to hear, then they could ignore you. But you won't. That's not a problem, and you can get in really close and cosy with them. Now that brings me on to the thorny issue of diversity. Diversity in relation to gender, sexuality, class, culture, ethnicity, and all the rest of it. Now, forgive me if I sound like I'm going on about political correctness, but you can, I think, make too much of this. There's a lot of people who feel that if a group is mostly made up of white middle-class men, then there's a problem. But if those white middle-class men are saying something helpful, what's the problem, I say? Of course they might argue that you're not very diverse, you're not representative, as they put it, but there's always someone to complain. The truth is, if those people really want to get involved, women, LGBT community, black and minority ethnic people, then they should come to you, shouldn't they? Why do they expect you to reach out and include them and do things in ways that they want and feel comfortable? No, I think this could actually be an assault on your group's effectiveness and solidarity. And you do want to keep things tight if you want to maintain the kinds of comfortable relationships that I'm expecting by now you've got with agencies and authorities, because they will know they've got a safe pair of hands with you. Now that brings me on to something else. There can be perks getting involved as you have done in such an organisation or group in your community as a service user. There could be trips to interesting places. You may have a chance to go to conferences, to speak at conferences, to write in important places, even to get local or government honours. Well, you've done all the work. Do you think it's really fair for a new interloper with some bright ideas to take some of those chances and opportunities and goodies away from people like you who've been there right from the get-go? I'm not sure. So that's another worry you might need to have if you're talking about really being inclusive. And to make sure that you can stay in control, don't have opportunities in your group to skill people up so they can learn new things, get new confidence, really play a more active and equal part. It's great to have them make the numbers up. It's great to have a larger number around you who'll agree with what you're saying, but do you really want them to have an equal say? Now that brings me on to another issue around democracy. If you are, for example, a disabled people's organisation or a community group concerned with deprivation, well, it can be a worry if a majority of the people who run your organisation are the people directly affected by those issues. I know that it could be argued that they'll know best and it's their interests that we're talking about, but historically and traditionally, charities have tended not to work like that, and they've all become very rich and powerful doing it, haven't they? You know, having non-disabled people lead for disabled people, having white worthies saying what black people might want. That's been great in the past, and you might see that as a model for your future. So keep things hierarchical, keep things where you have control, and don't forget, if you're really working well, you're doing and continuing to do exactly what you like. Now surely that has to be helpful in this day and age when those of us who are involved in community action and user-led organisations have so many struggles. Okay, there'll be others who'll grumble about you, but you won't take long to work out what that could be about. A little bit of green envy there perhaps, that they're not so fortunate, so valued, so legitimated, so privileged. Let them look to the lists of the big charities if they want to know how they should really go. And you keep confident in doing things just the same old way you've always done them, keeping the world just the same old place, with nothing much ever changing. Thanks ever so much. Bye for now.